This is Bitnar Talks, the engineer takes on construction. Episode 17. Hi, I'm Piotr Bitnar. Each day I help my clients plan and design building projects through Bitnar Limited, a consulting chartered structural engineer's practice. My biggest passion and the cornerstone on which I've built my business is finding clever solutions for construction projects. I am a chartered structural engineer and a budding software developer, so you can rest assured that I will strive to talk about the best practices and the use of new technologies in the industry. And if you're embarking on a construction project or are involved in planning, designing and building the world around us, you'll find this podcast useful. Approved Document B, Fire Safety, Part 4. Hi there, and welcome to Bitnar Talks, your favorite podcast on all matters of architecture, engineering and construction. It is Thursday the 23rd of May 2024, and I'm here back with you with the 17th episode and further information on fire safety in dwellings. Today, I'll close this part of the consideration of fire safety in buildings and we'll move to Volume 2, which deals with all other buildings in subsequent episodes. Last week, in episode 16, I talked about the requirement B3 and B4, covering sections 5 to 12. I told you about the requirement B3, which deals with the building stability during a fire event. I've also talked about measures to inhibit fire spread both within the building and between separate structures. That is requirement B4, and that the requirement mandates subdivision of buildings with fire-resistant construction and installation of automatic fire suppression systems where necessary. Additionally, it requires the inhibition of unseen fire and smoke spread within concealed spaces, putting extra attention onto cavity barriers and fire stopping wherever needed. In this episode, I will cover requirement B5, mention requirements of the Regulation 38, and tell you what you can find in appendices. This episode will cover the aspects of necessary provisions for the events of fire and requirement information for the safe management, maintenance, and operation of the building, as well as preparation for the event of fire. So without further ado, let's dive into the Fire Safety Requirement B5, Regulation 38 and appendices, as treated in the approved document. Today, I'll tell you a bit about the Requirement B5, Regulation 38 and tell you what you can find in appendices of the approved document. In the gist, we need to provide enough of appropriate space and access for the fire and rescue teams to allow uninhibited operation and consider feasible distances for the fire operation, like the hose length or enough water pressure to serve a building. There are provisions within the document dealing with typical fire safety installation and equipment. However, some consultation with the local fire brigade may be necessary as the equipment varies from district to district. In this episode, you'll find out what to take in consideration when approaching the firefighting and rescue operation requirement of the building regulations, what to think about when designing the building and operating it, and what sort of scope of information provision should be in place following the completion of the build or at the first occupation of such building to allow for the well-informed reaction in the event of fire. Alright, let's get on to it, shall we? Requirement B5, access and facilities for the fire service. As ever, let's start with finding out what the legislation requires of us in its wording. So, requirement B5. There are 2 points in it. Point number 1. The building shall be designed and constructed so as to provide reasonable facilities to assist firefighters in the protection of life. And point 2. Reasonable provision shall be made within the site of the building to enable fire appliances to gain access to the building. Relatively simple, right? And what does that mean in the real terms? Of course, the width and breadth of the approach will depend on the building's type and size. It is being understood that most of the firefighting will happen within the building. Therefore, there should be enough provision for the safe execution of a firefighting operation within that building, including smoke and heat ventilation where appropriate. And there should be enough space near the building to enable that operation, the operation of fire appliances. There should be enough information available about the building to allow firefighting men and women appropriate assessment before they go inside and risk their life-saving yaws. Let's start with section 13, vehicle access. In dwelling houses, vehicle access should be provided near enough to the building so it can serve it in the event of fire. The general prescription is around 45 meters for the pumping appliance, so the hose can reach the furthest point in that building that it tries to save. And the access point, the access doors, should be at least 750 millimeter wide to allow uninhibited access for the firefighters. In flats, however, there are two separate possibilities that can be chose. You can choose from. It's either similarly to the dwelling houses, provision of opening of 750 millimeter wide, which is universal. You need to have at least that. But also the pumping appliance. If the block of flats is small enough to allow outside pumping, then that's what should be provided with the furthest distance of 45 meters. If the elevation is long enough, the doors may need to be provided every 60 meter centers or to the edge of that building. So there needs to be enough access to allow proper firefighting action in the event of fire, and there need to be enough of those entry points to the building. Or we can provide fire mains to the building, and that can be of two types really. They can be either dry or wet. For dry fire mains, pumping appliances access should be no further than 80 meters away from the inlet, and that inlet needs to be clearly visible from the parking position of the appliance, and it needs to meet section 8 of British Standard 9990, or be of wet designation, and similarly need that 80 meter distance to access entrance to the fire main. It needs to be visible from the entry access, and with a clear access to the suction tank inlet, just in case it needs refilling. Hard standings and roads should comply with the regulations as well. Notably, the access should preclude a situation where the vehicle needs to reverse for more than 20 meters. If such is the case, there should be turning facilities in place. Road needs to withstand the axle pressure of the vehicle, which is around 12.5 tons in general, or 17 tons if the fire equipment needs to traverse the breach. Off to section 14, fire mains and hydrants in flats. So what is the dry and wet fire main, you ask? Dry is basically empty inside and is supplied with water by the firefighters' pumps, and there obviously will be limits to how far that can go, how far that system can go. And the wet system has its own tanks and is full of water, but inlets need to be provided to replenish tanks when needed. Fire mains should be provided in firefighting shafts or protected stairways, or in the circumstance where there is no such shaft and there is also no access for the firefighting vehicles. In any case, the maximum distance for the hose should not be more than 45 meters from the outlet if there are no sprinklers in place, and 60 meters if there are. If we do not know the layout of the building at the point of specification and design, the maximum distance should be taken as 2/3 of the on-plan distance, or on-plan diameter, if you like, of a circle diameter for the reach. There is a limit for the provision of a dry system, and it is 50 meters above the firefighting vehicle access level, to limit the hose pressure to 10 bars. 5 bars to reach the 50 meters and head, and to have residual 5 bars of pressure at the top to fight fire. The fire main system and hydrants are covered in more detail in British Standards 9990. The building may require additional private hydrants if it is constructed over certain limits, which is 100 meters away from an existing fire hydrant, or having floor area of over 280 meters squared. If the water supply is not sufficient, an alternative supply may be required and can be a tank, river, or any other source of water, but capable of supplying 45,000 liters of water at any point, and it is subject to consultation with local fire service. Section 15 treats about access to buildings for firefighting personnel in flats. Generally, for low-rise buildings with no basement, the access is achieved through front doors and protected stairways. For higher-rise buildings, though, with stories over 80-meter height over the vehicle access level, should have one or more firefighting shafts, each with firefighting lift. In any case, we are talking REI120 for the enclosure and REI60 for separation. So 2 hours for the shaft to become impenetrable to fire and stay stable, and REI60 for any separation within that shaft. Enclosure from the habitable part of the building and separation within the enclosure between stairs and lobby and lift. Doors in this construction should be subsequently considered as either E60 or E30. So E60 in 2 hour construction walls and enclosure, and E30 in 60 minutes enclosure. The additional consideration for basements and the protected shaft should be provided when the lowest basement story is below 10 meters from the vehicle access point and include a firefighting lift, or for large basements of minimum 900 meters square per story having 2 or more stories, but it doesn't require firefighting lift until the point of being below 10 meters. In fire shafted buildings, an additional shaft needs consideration if there are floors at level over 18 meters above fire and fire engines and rescue vehicles, or stories over, if there are stories over 900 meters square of floor area. It is important to keep the firefighting shaft isolated from the remaining part of the building and allowing ventilation of heat and smoke so it can remain operational for the time of the fire event, and have fire mains with outlets and valves at each story. There are rules for rolling shutters that should remain operational without the need of ladders. Clear signage should be provided for buildings with stories over 11 meters from the ground level. An evacuation alert system will be needed in blocks of flats with a top story over 80 meters above ground level. Secure information boxes should be provided for blocks of flats over the 11 meters above the ground level floor limits, so that the firefighting crew can access the information immediately. Section 16 then deals with venting of heat and smoke from basements in flats. Basement stories and compartments should be ventilated and provided with heat and smoke removal in place. When the basement is shallow, less than 3 meters, and small, less than 200 meters square in footprint, and if the rooms have windows and doors, these do not need special ventilation arrangements, as these can be easily ventilated by these openings. Strong rooms do not need smoke outlets, and the strong room is like a safe cabinet, safe room. So for example, banks would have these in basements, that's for sure. Natural smoke outlets should be distributed around the perimeter of the basement, of the room, of the enclosure, and at the high level of the space they serve. And they need to be of minimum of 2.5% area of the space they serve, either unobscured or clearly signed and accessible, and away from escape routes. If we install mechanical extraction, this can be provided for basement with sprinkler system installed but needs to be of sufficient standard. And sufficient standard means 10 air changes, 300 degree gas resistance for 60 minutes, and activated automatically. The ducting should be class A1 fire rating and separated if serves separate compartments or stories. This brings us to the last section, section 17, that extends on the regulation 38, fire safety information. So what does the legislation say here? Fire safety information regulation 38. There's 3 points here. Point number 1. This regulation applies where building work A. consists of or includes the erection or extension of a relevant building, or B. is carried out in connection with a relevant change of use of a building, and Part B of Schedule 1 imposes a requirement in relation to the work. Point 2. The person carrying out the work shall give fire safety information to the responsible person not later than the date of completion of the work or the date of occupation of the building or extension, whichever is the earlier. And point 3. In this regulation, fire safety information means information relating to the design and construction of the building or extension and the services, fittings, and equipment provided in or in connection with the building or extension, which will assist the responsible person to operate and maintain the building or extension with reasonable safety. B. A relevant building is a building to which the regulatory reform Fire Safety Order 2005 applies or will apply after the completion of building works. C. A relevant change of use is a material change of use where after the change of use takes place, the regulatory reform Fire Safety Order 2005 will apply or continue to apply to the building. And D. A responsible person has the meaning given by Article 3 of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. It is all about the relevant building and the provision of sufficient information to people or a person responsible for the building to make sure the building is operated and maintained as necessary and that the fire safety strategy is known. Information will need to cover the typical aspects of the building fire safety, such as 1. An as-built plan showing escape routes, including exit capacity per story in building, location of fire separating elements, fire doors, location of detection devices, alarms, firefighting equipment and points, sprinkler system and its valves and control equipment, smoke control systems, its modes of operation and control systems, high-risk areas. Point 2. Specification of fire safety equipment and maintenance schedules. Point 3. Assumption regarding the management of the building. Point 4. Any provisions for the evacuation of disabled people. And that's general provision, which will be enhanced upon in the higher risk or complex buildings, and will be enhanced with the fire safety strategy. That's point 1. In point 2, with procedures for operating and maintaining any fire protection measures with outlined cause and effect matrix strategy for the building. In essence, giving the person operating the building understanding of different fire scenarios and how they should be approached. And point 3, all the general information in minute details. This is it for the requirements. Now, why won't we skim through the appendices, shall we? So, Appendices A is a glossary of terms, and there's plenty of terms that you may not be familiarized with. So that's the appendices to go to. In Appendices B, there's plenty of explanation to the abbreviations and letters behind all of the specifications in the main text, like, behind the material performance, products and structures, or all your A2, S1, D0, B-roof T4s, or REI are explained here. Required fire resistance of building elements depending on the position and type of the building, minimum periods of fire resistance depending on the purpose group classification, and how to apply this together with the limits on uninsulated glazing used on escape routes can be found in Appendix B. Appendix C gathers all expectations regarding fire doors. Appendix D explains the measurements referred to in the approved document, or how to measure the clear openings and such. Appendix E covers consideration involving sprinklers. Appendix F lists all the standards referred to in documents, and there's circa 90 documents regulating all from materials through testing, designing and specification of all fire safety considerations. And finally we get to Appendix G, which lists all of other remaining legislation and publications the document refers to. So here you have it. Approved Document B, Volume 1 is done and dusted. But before we say our goodbyes, let's recap a little bit. As you can appreciate, the legislation provides comprehensive guidelines for building design and construction to ensure fire safety and facilitate firefighting operation. Requirement B5 deals with access and facilities for the fire service, where building must offer reasonable facilities for firefighters and allow fire appliances to access the building. Adequate internal provision for safe firefighting operations, including smoke and heat ventilation, are also required. Section 13 deals with vehicle access. For dwelling houses, vehicle access must ensure those are at least 750 mm wide and no point in the house is more than 45 meters from a pumping appliance. For flats, either similar access requirements apply or fire main system is provided. Dry fire main should be within 80 meters of the appliance, visible from the parking position, and comply with BS 9990 standard. Roads and hard standing areas must support vehicles' axles pressure and prevent reversing over 20 meters, with turning facilities provided if necessary. Fire mains and hydrants are dealt with in Section 14, where dry fire mains are supplied by firefighters' pumps and wet fire mains have internal water tanks. Fire mains should be within protected shafts or stairways, ensuring hose distances do not exceed 45 meters or 60 meters if with sprinklers. Dry systems must not exceed 50 meters high above the access level to limit hose pressure to 10 bars. Additional private hydrants are necessary if existing hydrants are over 100 meters away or for buildings with large floor areas. Here we go to Section 15, where access for firefighting personnel is considered. In low-rise buildings, access through front doors and protected stairway is a typical occurrence. High-rise buildings over 80 meters require firefighting shafts with lifts, ensuring REI120 enclosure and REI60 separation. Basements also require firefighting shafts if below 10 meters or 2 stories and more of large footprint. Firefighting shafts should facilitate smoke and heat ventilation with clear signage for buildings over 11 meters in height. Section 16 deals with venting of heat and smoke from basements, which must have heat and smoke ventilation. Small and shallow basements with windows and doors may not need special arrangements. Natural smoke outlets should cover 2.5% of the floor space, while mechanical extraction is required for basement with sprinklers, ensuring high performance and resistance to heat. All the provision in place will not make the building safer if there is no dissemination of easily accessible information, and that is Section 17, Fire Safety Information. Detailed and live fire safety information must be provided, including as-built plans showing escape routes, fire separation doors, detection devices, firefighting equipment, sprinkler systems, and high-risk areas. Specifications of fire safety equipment and maintenance schedules, management assumptions, and evacuation provisions for disabled people. For complex buildings, the fire safety strategy and maintenance procedures must be detailed. In appendices, you'll find all the information serving the main text, from a glossary of terms through fire resistance classifications and detailed fire door expectations to lists of all relevant approved standards, legislation, and publications. Now, you can appreciate that these comprehensive requirements ensure buildings are designed and maintained to facilitate effective firefighting and occupant safety. In the next episode, we move to the volume 2 of the approved document B, dealing with buildings other than dwellings. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that the consideration of fire safety requirements B5 and regulation 38 are now more clear and comprehensible for you. If you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out. In Bitna, we deal with planning, designing and managing of your projects, and we are always glad to facilitate a free initial consultation to steer you in the right direction. Visit www.bitna.co.uk and reach out to us. Whether your question is if we can help you with your project or what should I do, we will be able to give you a piece of non-obligatory advice. At Bitna, we help our clients design and execute their dream homes or investments. If your building is falling apart though, we can also help investigate the reasons behind it and to provide you with an appropriate strategy, design and specifications for the repair. Thank you again for listening. Please voice up your opinions. I'm waiting for you on LinkedIn and I want to hear from you. See you next week, and remember, Bitna designs the world around you. Toodaloo!